Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. I have a big passion for environmental conservation, so I always love sharing this information with others and letting other people know what they can do also to try to promote environmental conservation. So like she said, we do get a lot of drainage complaints about what's going on, with their properties and neighborhoods and things like that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just what stormwater is. I'll kind of go through what the city does to address drainage within the city, and then also provide you with some things that you can do to combat water and flooding issues on your own property as well. Stormwater essentially is any rainwater or snow melt that ends up on our surfaces, and as that picks up contaminants and pollutants, it ends up running off into our storm sewer system and out to our water bodies. So I really like to show this diagram because some people aren't aware of the difference between storm and sanitary. So sanitary, which would include, yes, your household water, sinks and toilets, that all gets piped to the wastewater treatment plant to get treated before it's discharged. Whereas the storm inlets that you see on the street that the water flows into, that actually goes right into our water bodies. There is no treatment in between. So that's why it's critical that we are paying attention to what is happening with our water that does end up on our streets and our neighborhoods. So just wanted to show this diagram. So as we start to develop more, we start to increase our impermeable surfaces, parking lots, driveways, things like that. And because of that, we end up with more runoff and less infiltration, unless you were in an area like on the left, where it's mostly prairie or wildlife. It's not allowing the water to infiltrate anymore. And so as we build cities bigger and bigger, there's really nowhere for this water to go. And so that's why they put in these storm sewer systems to try to essentially take that water away from the city as quickly as possible. So just an aerial view of Waterloo, you can kind of see, the large, especially downtown, the large areas with impervious surfaces. And so, as I mentioned, yes, the more impervious surfaces we have, less infiltration, which means more stormwater runoff. So what happens when the stormwater cannot drain? So I just wanted to mention some of the common issues as to why it does not drain properly is the picture on the left, you have your storm inlet. A lot of times that gets clogged with debris and trash or grass clippings or leaves. And so that water ends up backing up because it can't properly go into the storm inlet. The middle picture, sometimes people don't realize that those drainage ditches along the properties are a flowage way for the water to go through. And so sometimes they'll fill them in, not realizing that that's essential for the water to flow through our system. And then the picture on the right, just maintenance as well. Getting a lot of unwanted vegetation in those drainage ditches can really slow up the water and not allow for it to flow through the system like it should. So when we have these issues, that's how we end up with flooding and property damage. So now I want to go into kind of what the city does to manage stormwater. So we have levees for flood protection. So we have about 20 miles of these earthen embankments and walls. There are annual inspections required for this that the Corps comes in to look at. Regular maintenance, the picture on the bottom there. Tree clearing, just because they don't want trees growing on there and impacting the integrity of the levee system. We also have pump stations throughout the city, approximately about 20 pump stations, and essentially these function just like a sump pump would at your house. When we get these major rain events and the Cedar River is starting to rise, we don't want that water to back up into the city, so they put down these floodgates. Well, now what happens to the water that's in the city? It doesn't have anywhere to flow. So essentially they have these pump stations that lift the water up and over these floodgates so that we can get the water out of the city and into the river. And then we have our storm sewer system. So this is essentially the collection point. It goes into the storm inlet, through the storm sewer, out the outfall, and then into our water bodies. If we don't have a curb and gutter style, we've also got ditches and culverts for that water to flow through as well. This is our primary stormwater conveyance system within the city, about 400 miles of pipe. And improvements to this storm pipe are usually made with any street reconstruction projects or standalone projects that the city has. And then waste management is the one who usually does the maintenance for those. As I mentioned, on the streets, we have storm inlets. This is where the water flows into after our rain events. We have about 14,000 of these. The city has an MS4 permit, so a municipal separate storm sewer system permit that allows us to discharge our water into the Cedar River and Black Hawk Creek. And in order to do that, there are certain requirements that we have to meet yearly. And one of them is to label all of these storm inlets, just to make everybody aware of what I had mentioned, that this water is not treated before it's discharged. There's a picture in the middle. We've worked with Green Isle AmeriCorps to do some mural paintings around the storm inlets just to make them pop out to people, to make them aware that they're there. And we have talked about potentially doing adopt an inlet. So essentially, coming up with something where you could start small with just one neighborhood and get larger, but everybody kind of takes a role in keeping an eye on any storm inlets around their property and just making sure that, there's nothing in the way that's going to prevent the water from flowing where it's supposed to, or keeping an eye out and making sure no one's dumping anything illegally into the storm inlets as well. So as it goes through the storm sewer system, it does have to outfall into the water bodies. And we have about 500 of these throughout the city. And again, part of the permit that we have requires us to inspect all of these outlets annually. These inspections just make sure that they're not blocked at all, so the water can flow like they're supposed to, and that there aren't any illicit discharges occurring from any of these. And again, these ones are maintained by waste management. As I mentioned, another way, instead of the storm sewer pipes, this is still another part of our storm sewer system within the city, are ditches and waterways. So it's just another pathway for water conveyance. The biggest issue that we have for these, if they're not working properly, is because they get filled up with sediment from upstream, or trash, or any debris builds up in the culverts that's not allowing the water to flow like it should. And then street department is the one that does the maintenance for these ditches and waterways. So I'm going to go over some of the projects that the city currently has going on or will have going on that help with drainage. So the first one is the Dry Run Creek Interceptor. So this starts at the corner of San Martin and Kimball and extends east along San Martin all the way to Hess Road. What they did was demo and reconstruct existing lift station, and they're also installing 11,000 feet of new force and gravity main sanitary sewer. This was done just because there was some issues upstream due to flooding. So they are doing this to relieve pressure placed on the storm sewers upstream of this area. Another project that was done was Liberty Park. So there was really bad erosion along the banks through the creek that flows through there. And so what they did was regrade this area so that we aren't having any issues with erosion and sediment getting into the water. There's also a Q-net that runs through there, which is essentially just a concrete channel. And there are plans in the future to replace that because there are a few broken sections throughout there as well. This one, Westdale Biosoil, is in the design phase right now. So essentially the city was gifted some undevelopable land. You can see on the picture on the right what it looks like through there. It's eroding majorly. And so we're also just having issues with flooding downstream. And so we needed to definitely address these maintenance issues. And so the city applied for SRF. And so what that is you can apply for a loan and for like a sanitary project. And instead of paying the interest on it, you get the interest back to be able to use for water quality best management practices, essentially to help with water quality issues within the city. And so this is one of those projects. Another project that's in the works to get designed. So there's a 425 acre watershed located on old Devonshire school grounds. The plan here is to design a regional detention basin to, again, help reduce and eliminate some of the neighborhood flooding that's going on in that area. And it also is going to remove some of the homes from the floodplain as well. And then, you can see the picture on the right, just some of the flooding issues that they've had in those areas previously. Another one is Upton Avenue. So this one's a smaller watershed, it's 18 acres, located behind North Star and Pathways. Similar as the other one, they're going to install a regional detention basin to, again, try to help reduce and eliminate some of the neighborhood flooding that's going on downstream by slowing up some of that water before it's released. This one just got completed, Dearden Creek. The city was audited by FEMA. It was that the levees were not tall enough. So essentially the city was left with two options. They could either require a large area of homeowners to get flood insurance, or they could try to upgrade the levee system there along Dearden Creek. So that's what they did. Yeah, the picture on the left is what it looked like beforehand. And then the picture on the right is what they've done. So they replaced a lot of concrete. They raised it up and then also put a fence up. That one, like I said, just got completed and seeded just recently. Okay, so now I'm going to go into kind of how residents can help with these flooding issues that I've talked about. A lot of people are probably aware of sump pumps. The same idea. If you end up with water in your basement, you want to try to get that water out and away. There was a disconnection program that the city had to remove groundwater from the sanitary sewers. We do not have that program going on right now, but I know there's been discussion to start that again, just because there are some other neighborhoods that could definitely use that. And I did want to mention too that you can connect the sump lines to the city storm sewer if that's available on your street. And you can always check with us if you're not sure about that. You can try to do some yard improvements, try to do foundation tiles around the house, or do some yard tiling to take that water away from your home. There's also soil quality restoration, SQR. So that's essentially allowing, amending your soils so that you have not just clay and compacted soil for nowhere for that water to go. So you can try to improve those soil conditions to allow the water to infiltrate into your yard instead of running over it. And then another option is doing bioswales or maybe drainage easements. If you've got water coming from neighbors, you could try to come up with a swale or something that you could put between the properties to allow the water to flow through instead of, directly at your house where it's coming. Just doing some simple home improvements, making sure that your downspouts drain away from your home. So you can see in the picture on the right, if it all slopes towards your house, that water has nowhere to go. So it's essentially just sitting there and getting into your foundation. Make sure you're putting on any gutter extensions to get that water away from your home, so it's not just infiltrating back at it. If you have any cracks in your foundation or broken window wells, making sure to seal those up as best as possible. Also, any driveway and sidewalk joints, again, any way that the water would be able to seep into those. And they also do have sanitary sewer backflow prevention devices. That way, if you do have water backups, that won't allow it to get into your home. Some best management practices, BMPs, that you can do at home. If you do live on a water property, there's stream bank protection. So how you guys kind of saw in those other pictures earlier of that erosion that happens along the stream banks, that's due to flooding events. You can try to put down some sort of riprap or protection there to try to keep it from eroding any further or closer to your home. They have permeable pavers. So the idea here is a paver system, and there's a gap in between these pavers that has rock chips, and below that is a rock chamber. So the idea is that the water that ends up on your driveway will soak into the ground, and then there's usually a drainage pipe that takes it away from your home out to the storm sewer. Doing some native landscaping. So this is important just because the turf grass that a lot of us have on our lawns, the root system isn't very deep. And so when you have native landscaping, they have very deep root systems so that when it does rain or water is on your property, it has a place to infiltrate instead of running off or over that turf grass. You can do rain barrels. So this is a collection system that you can place at your gutters. That way, the water that falls onto your roof, you can collect that and try to store that water for later use. And then rain gardens. This is essentially a small depression that you can put in your yard that also has amended soils. And so you can try to direct any downspouts towards it, or yeah, if you've got a sump pump, you can try to pump that out to here. So it just gives it a spot for that water to infiltrate instead of running off your property and into the streets and into the storm sewer system. There is cost share available if you fall within the Dryland Creek watershed. There is also a REAP grant that you can try to apply for. I know that there's usually limited funds. So once that money's gone, then that's it for the year, but that's an option that you could try to reach out to your local USDA office to see what options that they have for that. So those are kind of some options for that, to try and find cost share for those. I mean, with that, I did want to mention that I've just recently updated the City of Waterloo's stormwater website. So I've kind of put in a lot more resources that have been up to date. So I included the link for that, and definitely encourage you guys to check that out, because there's really some good information in there that goes into a lot more depth about some of the practices and things that I've talked about in the presentation. So always feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in having me give this to anybody else.